Welcome to Earthquake Thursdays, and today we'll be covering the Pearl Harbor disaster. Just before 8 a.m. on December 7th, 1941, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor near Honolulu, Hawaii. The barrage lasted just about 2 hours, but it was devastating. The Japanese managed to destroy nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 enormous battleships and almost 200 airplanes. More than 2,000 American soldiers and sailors died in the attack, and another 1,000 were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress approved his declaration with just one dissenting vote. 3 days later, Japanese allies Germany and Italy also declared war on the United States, and again Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years into the conflict, America had finally joined World War II. Pearl Harbor and the road to war. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a surprise, but Japan and the United States had been edging towards war for decades. The United States was particularly unhappy with Japan's increasingly belligerent attitude towards China. The Japanese government believed that the only way to solve its economic and democratic problems was to expand into its neighbor's territory and take over its import market. To the end, Japan had declared war on China in 1937. American officials responded to this aggression with a battery of economic sanctions and trade embargoes. They reasoned that without access to money and goods, and especially essential supplies like oil, Japan would have to rein in its expansionism. Instead, the sanctions made the Japanese more determined to stand their ground. During months of negotiations between Tokyo and Washington, D.C., neither side would budge. It seemed that war was inevitable. But no one believed that the Japanese would start that war with an attack on American territory. For one thing, it would be terribly inconvenient. Hawaii and Japan were about 4,000 miles apart from each other. American intelligence officials were confident that any Japanese attack would take place in one of the relatively nearby European colonies in South Pacific, Dutch East Indies, for instance, or Singapore or Indochina. Because American military leaders were not expecting an attack so close to home, the naval facilities at Pearl Harbor were relatively undefended. Almost the entire Pacific Fleet was moored around Ford Island in the harbor, and hundreds of airplanes were squeezed into adjacent airfields to the Japanese. Pearl Harbor was an irresistible target, a date which will live in infamy. The Japanese plan was simply to destroy the Pacific Fleet. That way the Americans would not be able to fight back as Japan armed forces spread across South Pacific. On December 7th, after months of planning and practice, the Japanese launched their attack. At about 8 a.m., Japanese planes filled the sky over Pearl Harbor. Bombs and bullets rained into the vessels moored below at 8:10. And a 1,800-pound bomb smashed through the deck of the battleship USS Arizona and landed in the forward ammunition magazine. The ship exploded and sank with more than 1,000 men trapped inside. Next, torpedoes pierced the shell of the battleship USS Oklahoma with 400 sailors aboard. The Oklahoma lost her balance, rolled onto her side, and slipped underwater. By the time the attack was over, every battleship in Pearl Harbor, USS Arizona, USS Oklahoma, USS California, USS West Virginia, USS Utah, USS Maryland, USS Pennsylvania, USS Tennessee, and USS Nevada had sustained significant damage. All but USS Arizona and USS Utah were eventually salvaged and repaired. In all, the Japanese attacks on Pearl Harbor crippled or destroyed 18 American ships and nearly 300 planes. Dry docks and airfields were likewise destroyed. Most important, almost 2,500 men were killed and another 1,000 were wounded. But the Japanese had failed to cripple the Pacific Fleet. By the 1940s, battleships were no longer the most important naval vessel. Aircraft carriers were, and as it happened, all the Pacific Fleet carriers were away from the base on December 7th. Some had returned to the mainland, and others were delivered planes to troops in Midway Wake Island. Moreover, the Pearl Harbor assault had left the base's most vital onshore facilities, oil storages, deposits, repair shops, shipyards, and submarine docks intact. As a result, the US Navy was able to rebound relatively quickly from the attack. Yesterday, President Roosevelt said on December 8th, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. He went on to say, no matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through the absolute victory. I believe I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make very certain that this form of treachery shall never endanger us again. After the Pearl Harbor attack, and for the first time after years of discussion and debate, the American people were united in their determination to go to war. The Japanese had wanted to goad the United States into an agreement to lift the economic sanctions against them. Instead, they had pushed their adversary into a global conflict that ultimately resulted in Japan's first occupation by a foreign power. On December 8, Congress approved Roosevelt's declaration of war. 3 days later, Japanese allies Germany and Italy declared war against the United States. For the second time, Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years after the start of the conflict, the United States had entered World War II. This was today's Earthquake Thursdays, where we covered the attack of Pearl Harbor. On Pearl Harbor. If you want to know more about disasters that happened in the past, present, and possible future, then join me on Thursdays, where we will be prepared for the worst case scenarios. I will see you in the next Earthquake Thursdays episode on every Thursdays. Do you want to know what happened this week in history? Stay tuned. Ciao for now.
Thank you for watching. If you like my video, why don't you subscribe?